will be Rupar, Mirjana, right? On the secondary transfer effect.
That's surprising. Okay, let's see how this works. Okay, hi everybody. I would like to start presentation with the statement, I would say quite sad statement coming from a high school student that spoke for the documentary that was shot in Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina like 3 years ago. For those who don't know, in Mostar, the conflict was between the Bosniaks and Croats, and for the last 20 years, the city has been divided on two sides. So the left side of the bridge is the Bosniak side, and the right side of the bridge is the Croat side. So what this statement is basically saying, that this person, 17-year-old person, has never crossed the other side of the bridge, has never seen in his life the Bosniak person, and like, obviously, it never had any kind of a contact with that person. I guess that this statement reflects the reality of so many post-conflict societies where people are dealing with the segregation, territorial segregation, educational segregation, and in general, unwillingness and the fear of the people to engage in the contact with the members of the former adversaries. In such context, indirect forms of contact definitely should be, or at least idea is that could be more influential in shaping the reconciliation than direct contact. So our idea was just to, we didn't have any hypothesis, so we just wanted to see what is actually the role of the mass-mediated contact in shaping the reconciliation. Specifically, in our study, we focused on forgiveness. With respect to the contact violence, of course, we know that positive contacts improve the attitudes. However, the negative contact worsens attitudes more than positive contact is able to improve them. However, there is also this optimistic evidence showing that the prevalence of positive contact could actually fight against the strength of the negative contact. However, when it comes to the post-conflict societies, and especially mass media, it could be probably too much optimistic to think that the positive media contact could actually be more prevalent than the negative one, knowing that mass media is usually the tool for increasing the intergroup tensions and highlighting them. So what we expected is that definitely mass-mediated contact, positive mass-mediated contact will be lower in its frequency. However, what we were wondering, we didn't have any hypotheses, but we were just wondering whether this whether this positive mass-mediated contact, exactly because being so rare in its frequency, could be actually be more influential than the negative contact. Further, we wanted to see the secondary transfer effects. Okay, there is like this bunch of the literature on that, showing the secondary transfer effects in the non-conflict settings. Also, there is like there is also the research on the secondary transfer effect on the mass-mediated contact that is still in its beginnings. And also there is some findings from the post-conflict settings, including the presentation from at the first presentation today. However, we wanted to extend this line of research by focusing on the societies where conflict happened between, like the multi-ethnic post-conflict societies where conflict happened between more than two ethnic groups. And we wanted to see whether the positive and the negative direct and mass-mediated contact, the effects of that on forgiveness can generalize from one, can affect with one ethnic group, can affect the reconciliation with another former adversary in the same society. And as a mediating mechanism, we focused on out-group trust, which has been confirmed as a key mediating mechanism for direct contact. So we expected actually that it's going also to mediate the mass-mediated effect. And with respect to the secondary transfer effect, we wanted to see whether is it possible for trust and forgiveness to generalize from one former adversary to second former adversary. Our first study we did in Kosovo. We focused on the conflict between the Albanians and Serbs who engaged in the conflict over the Kosovo territory. The war started in 1999, however, and it ended in 1998, sorry. And it ended in 1999. However, there was, for the last 20 years, the tensions between these two ethnic groups are like very high. The Kosovo region is still, like Kosovo territory is still being disputed by Serbia, and the contact between these two ethnic groups is minimal. So not to repeat all the measures and what we did, okay. So what we actually got was that, as we expected, there was almost no positive, direct positive contact between these two ethnic groups. And with respect to the mass-mediated contact, also the negative mass-mediated contact was much more frequent than positive mass-mediated contact. The results showed that only positive however, despite the higher frequency of the negative mass-mediated contact, we showed that the results showed that only positive mass-mediated contact had an effect on forgiveness. There was overall effect, the total effect, and also indirect one through trust. And also there was an effect of the positive direct contact through forgiveness. So there was no effect, nor direct negative direct one or the negative mass-mediated one. So overall, we showed that, just quickly, so we showed that despite the being lower in frequency, positive mass-mediated contact has actually stronger effects than the negative mass-mediated contact. What is also nice results, that the positive mass-mediated contact is a stronger predictor of forgiveness than positive direct contact. And we show the mediating role of the trust. However, there is a huge limitations with this data, because it's not that it's just skewed the data, it's like there was completely floor effect of the data because people had no contact. So we cannot really talk about the frequency, that the more people have contact, mass-mediated contact, the more they're willing to engage. We could just say that the people who actually had contact, any kind of contact, because we treated them as dichotomous variable, so the people who had any kind of a contact, they showed improve the attitudes, the greater forgiveness. However, we also have the two another data sets coming from Kosovo and Serbia that we collected. And in these data sets, we actually managed to collect greater variety. So we actually managed to find people who have contact with the members of the outgroups. And those were actually quite older participants that we had in the first study. And both studies showed that in both studies, participants had lower mass-mediated contact, however, lower in frequency, but it still had stronger effects than the negative mass-mediated contact. In the second study, we wanted to try to replicate the findings from the first study and these two studies, another two studies that we did. And we also wanted to check the secondary transfer effects of the intergroup contact, and we focused on the multi-ethnic post-conflict society of Bosnia and Herzegovina. So the conflict in Bosnia and Herzegovina happened between three ethnic groups, Bosniaks, Serbs, and Croats. The first part of the war, the first part of the conflict actually included the conflict between Croats and Bosniaks on one side and the Serbs on the another side. It was in 1992. However, as the time was passing by, the Croats and Bosniaks engaged in the conflict between themselves, what resulted until 1995, all three groups were actually having the conflict between each other. We focused on the Bosniaks as the participants because they are considered to be internationally recognized as the victims of the conflict, and we focused on Croats as a primary outgroup and the Serbs as a secondary outgroup. And we examined the effects of the positive and negative contacts with Croats on forgiveness toward the Croats, and also the same with the Serbs, and the secondary transfer effects, not to repeat this. Okay. So the results are actually really nice and optimistic, showing that people actually had contact, direct contact with members of different outgroups, which was quite surprising. And they show that they actually had more positive contact with Croats than they had more positive contact with the Serbs, and this is what we actually expected to happen. With respect to the positive mass-mediated and negative mass-mediated contact, the positive mass-mediated contact for the Croats was actually more frequent than the negative contact. Again, it was really surprising. And however, for the Serbs, it was in line with the expectations that the negative mass-mediated contact was actually more frequent than the positive mass-mediated contact. So when it comes to the results, When it comes to the result, sorry. When it comes to the results of the primary transfer effects actually show the very same results as in the study one. So it was only positive direct and positive mass-mediated contact that had effect on forgiveness. And as in line with expectation, we confirmed the secondary transfer effect of both positive and mass-mediated, positive direct and mass-mediated contact. And the generalization happened through trust and through forgiveness. So more or less everything was in line with expectations. So the conclusion of the study one was that we confirmed the very same thing as in the study one. So the positive but not the negative contact, direct and mass-mediated contact predicted forgiveness. However, in this case, it predicted regardless of frequency. So regardless, it was more frequent or the less frequent, which actually makes us think whether we can actually conclude that mass-mediated contact has such a strong effect exactly for being low in the frequency. However, we kind of interpreted it that in general, intergroup relations in the societies are quite bad. And majority of the information coming about the outgroup are actually bad. So it could be that this positive information from the media is kind of being unexpected. So it could still had a stronger effect. The second thing is that the positive mass-mediated contact was equally strong in the case of Croats or stronger in the case of Serbs. Predictor of forgiveness than direct contact, which is also a nice finding. And intergroup trust mediated the link. And in the second study, we found this secondary transfer effect that it is actually possible to generalize the effects from one former adversary to another former adversary. Altogether, our findings show that mass media can be used as an efficient complement or even a substitution for sometimes scarce direct contact with post-conflict societies. And fostering information about the former adversaries that are more likely to enhance outgroup trust could be particularly effective in promoting the forgiveness and reconciliation. And for the future studies, they could actually investigate what kind of mass media content could be the most effective one in promoting the positive impressions. With respect to the secondary transfer effects, we showed that actually in the multi-ethnic post-conflict society, improving the relations and achieving the reconciliation with one ethnic group could potentially bring peace to the whole society. However, like future research that include more distinct former adversaries that are not maybe part of the same society, but maybe the neighbors that had a conflict or neighboring countries that were in conflict with the group or something similar. Thank you for your attention.
Yeah, thanks for the interesting data. So, any questions?
Hi, Mirjana. As you know, I'm from Bosnia as well, and you know, it's kind of both compelling and sort of hard to, you know, to sort of see the map there and kind of see, you know, basically where I was born and listen and you know, see this conflict kind of, you know, described in a particular way. And you know, I really appreciate this work on trying to see, you know, how can there be sort of a way forward, right? So I just kind of wanted to comment on this notion of post-conflict and what that actually looks like. And, you know, I bet you've been kind of following the news of you know, the last however many years. And, you know, I'd argue that in this society, like in many other societies, we're eager to describe as post-conflict. I'm not sure how true that is. You know, politically, I mean, we're not shooting each other. There is no kind of blood on the streets so much anymore. But I mean, this notion of that we are ready to reconcile, you know, I think I'd like us to kind of stop and sort of examine a little bit, because, you know, if we take your work and sort of think about what might be the applied kind of leg of this work, would you then go and advise forgiveness and trust right now in this political climate in the Balkans? You know, I actually think that might be a little unsafe, to be honest, for Bosniaks at least, you know, we've had this orientation in the 90s, and I think the advice from the Bosniak leader in the 90s at the kind of just before the war started was like, oh, go out into the streets and walk and, you know, meet people and, you know, we can do this peacefully, right? Not knowing that the snipers were already on the hills, right? So, I mean, that's kind of a stark example, but I think this notion of post-conflict and what that looks like really needs to be kind of thought about carefully in the context of contact work and other kind of work before we start to sort of, you know, wishfully, and I totally understand the kind of the motivation, you know, looking to solution like trust and forgiveness while the conflict is pretty much still there. It's just fought by other means. Sorry, I know this is a comment, not really a question.
Well, like from my personal opinion, when it comes to the Bosnia, the thing is that Bosnia is characterized as a post-conflict society. That's the fact. But the thing is that all the issues that should have been resolved and that have been officially resolved with the Dayton Peace Accord that happened in '95, they're not still resolved. The thing is that all three parties are still pursuing the goals that they were wanting to have in the war. They were just being stopped because of this, like the peace agreement. So in theory, it is considered as a post-conflict society. In the practice, it's still the society that actually didn't have the real conflict resolution when it comes to the goals that all the groups wanted to achieve. Because all three groups, like currently, they're going in the different directions when it comes to the future of the country. One group wants unification, one group wants separation, one group wants a separate entity. So there is no actually consensus of what it means, how to reconcile the country. So I completely agree with you that, yeah, about it.
Thank you from my side too. But I think my question, or rather maybe also a comment, might add on that, because I'm really not so comfortable with the measure of forgiveness. Maybe just, did you have like, you'd had the trust in there too, but I would love to see something like, I don't know, the ability to talk about the past, or I don't know, willingness to discuss the future, something like that. Do you understand?
Well, the thing is that the forgiveness was kind of, I don't know, when I started reading about all the reconciliation and everything, there was apology, there was forgiveness. And I was like, okay, let's measure forgiveness and apology, because it's somehow a logical thing. But like the more I was actually doing it, it started having, I think it's kind of I don't know if it's too early for the apology, because there was still no these official statements of, maybe there was of some parties, but not of all of them. I think it's too early to talk about it, but there is still not initiative, as you said, for willingness to engage in the contact, willingness to discuss the past. There's like, I think there is still much going on before the forgiveness can actually happen. And I completely agree that maybe in this case, like at least in the case of, I think both Kosovo and Bosnia, some other variables should be taken into consideration. Yeah, that's true. Thank you.
I have a quick question. I mean, it's obvious it's only cross-sectional data, but maybe you can reflect on how you can rule out that mass media contact, that this is simply a kind of self-selection. So, well, because I mean, the statement at the end was very strong, I think.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, the fact is that it's true that, of course, the people who are more like willing to forgive, and they could be just more willing to expose themselves to the information. And we also like recently did a study of the exposure to the in-group and the out-group media. And it's true that people are more exposed to the in-group media than the out-group media. Well, I guess I should do the experimental study to honestly answer that question, but I still think that because people are exposed to because the language in Bosnia for all three ethnic groups is completely understandable. So even that it's officially called differently, it's completely understandable. And people are exposed to the different informations. So we actually got the study that people are exposed to this, to the media of their own group and of the other groups. So they are getting these kind of like positive and negative. They could get actually positive and negative information. So, yeah.
Just more a description of the media.
Yes.
Wonderful stuff. Wonderful, wonderful work. Thank you for doing it. And to give you a little bit of a comeback to Oliver, this is your PhD thesis. You cannot control for everything during your PhD thesis. However, you know from other research done by Liz Pellock, Risata Bilali, Johanna Vollhardt, Erwin Straub, who did control for media exposure in a semi-experimental setting, they did show an improvement on forgiveness, willingness of forgiveness, and improvement of trust. So we're starting with a good point. We have empirical, experimental field data that shows that mass media has a positive impact, and I think it's for very good reason that those mechanisms we showed in previous research are at play here as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. Well, I guess like the thing is what we were planning for our next study, there is a like little bit not a problem, but like these two primary and the secondary outgroup are quite similar toward each other in the terms of the language, in the terms of the religion, in the terms also the fact that Bosniaks were the victims of toward in the relation between all these two groups. So there is this problem of the similarity with these two groups. And what we wanted maybe to check in the next study is to focus on maybe on Serbs and their relations with Croats, and to check the generalization on Albanians, because this could be actually like the two conflicts that happened, but like these two groups are completely like different. So yeah.
Okay, so thank you again, and I think we can close this session.